Hello, welcome. It is my very first live in this format, so I am really excited to be here with you all today. And I'm so glad you're here. And whether you're joining live with me or you're returning to this a little bit later, I just want you to make a little bit of room for some inquiry today. And this experience is really meant to be participatory. Um, it's really about pausing if you're listening to the replay and giving yourself a moment to reflect, or even just giving yourself a moment to consider what comes up and write something down. And I'll invite you to share in the chat, share in the comments if you're listening to the replay. And just, you're also really welcome to simply listen and reflect privately. So, I have been thinking about a particular kind of transition lately. And it's the kind that really begins before we necessarily know we're in it. And often that means that there's nothing dramatic that happens. Nothing really on the outside necessarily looks different. And yet, something that once fit just simply doesn't fit anymore, right? And that might look like a role or a definition of success. It could be a pace of something that you've just carried for a really long time. It could look like a way you've learned to lead, or even just an idea about what you're supposed to be, right? Or what your life is supposed to look like. And often, as soon as we notice that, one, we can't unsee it. And two, we want to know, huh, so what do I do now? Right? What do I do now? And that often turns this sense of knowing into knowing what no longer fits into knowing exactly what you need to do next. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, because I really want to pause that question of, so now what do I do? Pause it for our time together today, and practice pausing that together, because there might be some real value in that. So before we decide what comes next, I just want us to take a little bit of room to notice this question that I shared when I scheduled this live experience is, what are you outgrowing? What are you outgrowing? And as we go, again, I just invite you to have something to write with nearby. Take some notes. And you don't necessarily need to capture everything, but just notice the words or the phrases that just seem to want to keep your attention or capture your attention. So I've been thinking about this question in my own context, and it's been something that I've thought about, I'll say, for quite a while, as I started to realize I was outgrowing things. And for a long time, I had plenty of evidence that things were working really well, right? And I had built a career doing meaningful work in the climate and systems change space. I was taking on increasing responsibility, right? Bigger teams, bigger problems, more strategy. I had a strong network, right? I had interesting challenges and a great paycheck. And people trusted me to figure things out, to try new things. And I usually did. I loved trying new things. I love to learn, and I love to problem solve with people. And I can see around corners, and I notice gaps. I thought several steps ahead, which was very valuable when you're with a team and you're doing new things. Um, and something I really enjoy doing to this day is building bridges, right, between people and ideas, between where we are and where we want to go next. I love that kind of creativity and iterating. So when something wasn't working, I usually stepped in, right? I felt competent and I am competent. I'm capable. I am trusted. And there came a point when I finally realized I was just carrying too much. Too much. I was over functioning and over carrying. And I was trying to solve problems that weren't necessarily mine to solve. Right. And so it could be it kind of looked like believing that if I could find the right approach, that if I could build the right bridge or make the right case, I could move something much larger than myself, right? Something that a lot of people were trying to figure out. And from the outside, on paper, much of this looked like leadership, right? It's how I had seen leadership in action, and I thought that's what great leadership was. But here's the thing, sometimes misalignment doesn't look like failure, right? Sometimes it looks like competence. And that's when something started to change in me, and it was, I don't know, something that it felt like a feeling. It felt like a feeling. It was a feeling at first. It wasn't just a dramatic event necessarily where I suddenly knew. It just was this twinge in my gut, and then it slowly became this ache in my bones. And that twinge you can kind of ignore. I'm like, noticed it, moving on. The ache in my bones, that deeper sense of knowing became a little harder to ignore, right? It really was catching my attention. But again, nothing was obviously wrong. And so I didn't feel like I had to make a decision yet, right? And I could always find another reason to stay. Um, and I talked about some of them already, but my reasons were, oof, the paycheck's great, right? And my network is fun and it's growing. The status of the kind of role that I had, the opportunity that I was in at the moment was really amazing. And the challenges that we were working to solve, the missions, right? But I was still learning. I remember telling myself that if I stop learning, that's when I know it's time to go. But there's a huge problem with that. I love learning and I'm almost always learning. And I didn't realize that I'd created a condition for myself. I created a condition for leaving that I was really never actually going to meet. And I realized that I was bargaining, right? I was bargaining with myself to avoid a deeper question, a more important question. And I finally confronted it. Do I still want this? It's a simple question, and it can carry a lot of weight, right? What that answer might be, it can carry a lot of weight. So at some point, I realized that I'd become very good at explaining why my life made sense on paper, right? Why I should stay. But I stopped excuse me, I stopped asking myself what success actually meant to me. And that was kind of alarming for me, right? I always thought that I had been just living in my integrity. I didn't have a very linear career, and that was part of who I am. It is part of who I am. However, when I realized that I was living someone else's version of success, that kind of stopped me in my tracks, right? And the thing about it is all of the roles that I've had have been so real. I've been so excited and passionate about them, and the accomplishments that I have with myself, in my leadership, and my teams, with the amazing organizations I worked for, those all mattered, right? And the experience was completely my own. And, I had to sit with that and realize I'm not rejecting any of my amazing experiences or any of the passion or the leadership that I brought to these roles. It was just that somewhere along the way, I had kind of confused the evidence of my success with the definition of success. And I'd outgrown it. Um, it when I was really recognizing that things I hadn't been fully recognizing before, everything started to shift, because it started to look like, this isn't the culture that I want to continue growing in, right? Or this isn't the responsibility that I need to keep carrying. This isn't my responsibility to carry, actually. And something I have shared before, but I don't know if I've shared on Substack. A huge moment was when I realized that I was fighting to belong in a room that I actually no longer really wanted to be in. I was putting forth so much effort. And that's when I eventually I recognized that I didn't need to know exactly what was next, right? I didn't need to know what I wanted in that moment in order to tell myself the truth about what was actually happening. And that was a big deal. Almost this idea of giving myself permission to say this is no longer working, this is no longer what I want, and not have an answer for what I do want. Because something can still be successful and not be our success any longer. It can also still be working and no longer be working for us. And I didn't need to make what came before wrong in order to recognize that I'd outgrown it. So I couldn't necessarily, at this point, really identify, really name what it is that I wanted. And I think that point right there is what made me feel stuck. Like I can't do anything until I know that answer. I don't know. Has anyone else felt that way? Because and this is what I've learned, and this is what a lot of today's reflection is going to be about. That I could just recognize that the old answer or that old way of being, it just wasn't right for me anymore. It wasn't the answer that I wanted to continue to live in, and I didn't want it anymore. So I want to invite you to practice this a little bit because rather than immediately asking ourselves, what do we do next? Right? What am I going to do? Ooh, I have this big problem now. I need to solve it. I want to invite you to just stay in the recognition for a little bit. And I'll offer a few questions, and you don't need to have polished answers. Just notice what comes up before you try to make sense of it or before you try to edit it. So, the first question I'd love to ask you is what no longer fits? And if you want to go a little deeper, I'll offer a few kind of sub reflections, if you will. What feels a little tighter than it used to, or a little off? And what are you doing because you've simply just always done it? And where are you noticing some resistance or some fatigue or some restlessness? Where are you noticing some longing or some aliveness, some energy? So the next question I'd love to invite you to reflect on is, what might that be telling you? What might that be telling you? And you don't have to make it mean anything yet. Just notice what comes up and allow just some awareness and acknowledgement of it. And the next question is, what are you becoming curious about instead? And not necessarily what do I want instead, but what are you curious about? What keeps getting your attention? Where do you notice some energy? Are there any patterns that you're noticing? So, if we were sitting in a room together, this is the point where I would want to hear what you're noticing. I want to invite you to really to share and participate if you're interested. But since you may be listening on your own, I'll invite you to just stay in your reflection for another moment and also invite you to share in any of the comments as you finish this reflection. But I'd love to hear, what did you hear yourself say that you don't want to rush past? So we started with, well, an inquiry, right? What are you outgrowing? And I wonder if you hear that question just a little differently now. And you don't need to leave today knowing what comes next. Maybe there's something really valuable in just simply recognizing that this doesn't fit anymore. Because we often want awareness to immediately tell us what to do, right? We've kind of learned to equate awareness with action, immediate action. And that is something that I'd love for you to maybe shift your perspective on today, where perhaps the first gift of awareness is actually there's something that we can see that we couldn't see before. Just noticing that gift, that, ooh, I've just noticed something that I've never seen before. Reflection helps us see, and awareness creates choice and opens up possibility. And then we can move to make a decision, right? So you don't have to make a choice today. I invite you to really stay in that awareness if you'd like to. And I do also really want to invite you to practice this a little bit, right? So over the next few days, don't try to solve what comes up immediately. Don't solve what surfaced today. Just notice it and notice when it appears. Notice what makes it louder. Notice what gives you energy. So, really notice what you keep reaching towards, perhaps, instead of what you used to reach towards. But really notice that and see what your own life has to teach you. And there is another question that I have been sitting with underneath this inquiry of what are we outgrowing? And I've been spending a lot of time with this one is how do we continue leading while becoming fully ourselves? And that's one that I've sat with for a while and I'll continue to sit with for quite some time. And I'd love to invite you into that inquiry with me because we don't really get um, the gift of just stopping everything while we're going through transition, right? We have to continue living our life and leading as we're in uncertainty, as we're moving through transition, as we're growing. And so there there are we know that there are still people depending on us, systems depending on us, right? Work, life, family, ourselves, our community. We have to make decisions during big transitions, and we carry a lot of responsibilities. So that question I find to be um, really interesting and really dynamic. So on September 9th, I am offering a free workshop, longer than this experience to really get into inquiry with that question in community, right? So with other people who are joining that live experience. So it's called Leadership Through Transition. And we're going to explore what it means to lead from that space of not simply once we've made it safely to the other side of that transition, but how do we lead from within that transition period, that growth period, that time of uncertainty. So if any of today's questions opened up anything for you, if you want to stay in that inquiry, not just with me, but with in community, um, I'd love for you to join. I think it would be really fun to have so many of you there. And before we go, I'll drop the link in the chat. I'll also include it in the show notes. But before we close, I'd really invite us to look back at whatever you wrote or just notice or reflect back to whatever you noticed as we were in some inquiry around what we're outgrowing. And consider what's one thing you want to carry with you from this conversation. And you don't have to do anything with it necessarily. Just notice it. Just don't rush past it. And I want to thank you for being here today, for tuning in, for listening, for those who are on Team Replay. I see you and I'd love to hear from you. But I just want to say thank you for bringing your own experience into this kind of conversation and into this inquiry, because that's where we learn and that's where we grow.